He spoke to millions through his performances, and then silence changed his life forever. He was always just an ordinary actor, albeit a famous one. Sir Anthony Hopkins had mastered every role, won every accolade. His days passed by quietly. Between film sets and award ceremonies, nothing hinted at trouble. But one day, something happened that turned everything upside down. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. Just a simple invitation to visit an Amish community in Pennsylvania to help with a barn raising of all things. But then, things started to get even stranger. Seconds felt like an eternity. His heart was pounding. And then, at that very moment, when it seemed like there was no turning back, he found himself working alongside a mute Amish boy named Samuel, whose silent wisdom would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about communication. But the most unbelievable part happened after that. It was so incredible that if someone had told him before, he never would have believed it. The acclaimed actor, known for his powerful voice and commanding presence, would discover that true connection requires no words at all. Through the simple act of building a barn with the Amish community, Sir Anthony Hopkins would learn lessons about silence that would transform not just his craft, but his entire understanding of human connection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The renowned actor's arrival at the Zook farmstead marks the beginning of an extraordinary week, though neither he nor his hosts yet grasp the profound impact this visit will have on their lives. Eli Zook, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, stands at the edge of his property, his tall frame silhouetted against the misty backdrop. His keen eyes, accustomed to reading both weather patterns and human nature, study the approaching vehicle with quiet interest. As Anthony steps from his car, the crunch of gravel under his feet seems unusually loud in the pre-dawn stillness. The actor, known for commanding attention on screen, appears almost diminutive against the towering red barn behind him. Eli's measured approach, neither hurried nor hesitant, speaks of generations of practiced hospitality. The two men, separated by worlds of experience yet connected by an inexplicable thread of destiny, regard each other with mutual curiosity. From the farmhouse window, young Samuel Zook watches the scene unfold with intense interest. The 10-year-old boy, whose world has been silent since birth, possesses an uncanny ability to read the subtle language of human interaction. His mother, Miriam, places a gentle hand on his shoulder, her own expression a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope. They've hosted English visitors before, but something about this particular guest feels different. Ruth Becker, the English woman who arranged this unusual visit, stands slightly apart from the scene, her presence a bridge between two worlds. Her understanding of both the English and Amish ways makes her the perfect intermediary for what's to come. She watches as Caleb, the young Amish leader, approaches from the barn, his traditional hat held respectfully in his hands despite his visible uncertainty about this unconventional arrangement. The morning air carries the sweet scent of fresh-baked bread from Miriam's kitchen, mingling with the earthy aroma of newly tilled fields. These familiar smells seem to ease the initial tension as Eli extends his hand in welcome. "Thee is welcome here," he says simply, his words carrying the weight of genuine hospitality. Anthony's response, a quiet nod and gentle handshake, speaks volumes about his respect for this moment. The gathering catches the attention of the community's children, who peer curiously from behind fence posts and wagon wheels. Their presence adds an element of innocent wonder to the scene, their whispered conversations carrying across the morning air. What brings this Englishman to their quiet corner of the world? What could he possibly seek among the plain folk? As Eli leads Anthony toward the farmhouse, Samuel slips away from his mother's side and appears at the door. The boy's direct gaze captures Anthony's attention immediately, initiating what will become one of the most significant connections of this remarkable week. Without words, without pretense, the acclaimed actor and the silent child share a moment of pure understanding that transcends their vastly different worlds. Inside the farmhouse, Miriam has prepared a traditional breakfast, her quiet efficiency a testament to generations of Amish hospitality. The simple meal laid out on the worn, wooden table represents more than sustenance. It's an offering of fellowship, a first step in what will become a profound journey of discovery for everyone involved. Ruth observes as Anthony takes his place at the table, noting how he unconsciously mirrors the quiet dignity of his hosts. The actor who has portrayed kings and commanders now sits among the plain folk as one of them, ready to learn their ways. Caleb, initially standing apart, gradually draws closer, his natural leadership qualities emerging as he begins to see beyond his first impressions of their English guest. The morning unfolds with the timeless rhythm of farm life continuing around them. The clip-clop of horse hooves on the lane announces the arrival of more community members, each bringing their own mixture of curiosity and reserved welcome. Who could have predicted that this unlikely gathering would set in motion events that would touch every life it encountered, leaving none unchanged? The morning sun cast long shadows across the Zook farmhouse as Anthony Hopkins settled into the unfamiliar rhythm of Amish life. His first full day began with the distant sound of horses' hooves and the gentle creaking of wooden wheels, a stark contrast to the London traffic he'd left behind. Through the kitchen window, he observed young Samuel Zook, who stood motionless by the garden fence, his eyes fixed on Anthony with an intensity that spoke volumes despite his silence. What was it about this child that seemed to pierce through the carefully constructed walls of a seasoned actor? Samuel's presence carried a weight beyond his years, his inability to speak somehow making his observations more acute, more penetrating. When their eyes met, Anthony felt an unexpected connection, as if the boy could read the weariness that had driven him to seek solitude in this distant corner of Pennsylvania. The moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps on the gravel path. Ruth Becker appeared, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth, her practical dress and warm smile bridging the gap between the English and Amish worlds. She moved with the confidence of someone familiar with both realms, greeting Samuel, with a gentle touch to his shoulder before turning to Anthony. "The community has a tradition of welcoming visitors," Ruth explained, unveiling homemade bread and preserves. "Though I suspect you're used to more elaborate welcomes, Sir Anthony?" Her question carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity about the man who had chosen their simple community for his retreat. As they shared the fresh bread in the Zook's kitchen, Eli's daughter Miriam worked quietly nearby, her movements precise and purposeful. What thoughts lay behind her reserved demeanor? Anthony wondered about the story of Samuel's father, but cultural sensitivity and respect for privacy held his tongue. Instead, he observed the subtle interactions between mother and son, their wordless communication both fascinating and touching. The arrival of Caleb, a young Amish leader, shifted the atmosphere. His initial skepticism was evident in the slight furrow of his brow and the measured distance he maintained. Yet as Ruth facilitated conversation, sharing stories of community life and explaining local customs, the tension gradually eased. How many others in this close-knit community shared?
Caleb's reservations about the English visitor?
Samuel remained a constant presence throughout the morning, his eyes following Anthony's every movement. The boy's attention wasn't intrusive, but rather seemed to stem from a deep well of curiosity. When Anthony demonstrated how to fold a paper airplane, Samuel's face lit up with understanding, his hands mimicking the motions with precise care. This simple interaction drew a rare smile from Miriam, who watched from her work at the sink. Ruth's role as cultural interpreter became increasingly valuable as she explained the nuances of Amish etiquette to Anthony. "Notice how Samuel waits for his grandfather's nod before leaving the table," she pointed out. "Every gesture here carries meaning. Every silence holds purpose." Her insights helped Anthony navigate the intricate social fabric of his temporary home. The morning's interactions revealed the complex dynamics at play within the Zook household. Eli's quiet authority anchored the family, while Miriam's gentle strength provided its daily rhythm. Samuel's silence, rather than creating distance, seemed to draw people closer, encouraging more careful observation and thoughtful interaction. Even Caleb's initial reservation began to soften as he observed Anthony's genuine respect for their ways. As the day progressed, Anthony found himself drawn into the household's natural flow. The absence of modern technology's constant interruptions allowed for deeper attention to human connection. How different was this from the superficial interactions of his usual world? The authenticity of these first encounters challenged his preconceptions about simplicity and complexity in human relationships. Ruth's departure left Anthony with a growing appreciation for the delicate balance of this community. Samuel lingered nearby, his presence a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections require no words at all. The boy's quiet observation seemed to ask, what secrets and stories did this English visitor bring, and how would they affect the careful harmony of their Amish world? These initial hours in the Zook household laid the foundation for what promised to be a transformative experience. As Anthony watched Samuel return to his daily tasks, he wondered how this silent child might become his most important teacher, in understanding the power of presence over performance, of being over doing. What lessons awaited in the days to come, and how would they reshape his understanding of community, connection, and communication? In the gentle stillness of an Amish morning, Samuel Zook's graphite pencil moved across paper with surprising precision for a 10-year-old boy. His eyes darted between his subject and his sketch, capturing every detail of Sir Anthony Hopkins, who sat unaware on the wooden porch steps, lost in thought while watching the sunrise paint the Pennsylvania countryside in hues of amber and gold. The scratching of pencil against paper finally caught Anthony's attention, and he turned to find Samuel perched on an overturned milk crate, drawing pad balanced carefully on his knees. Rather than disturb the moment, Anthony remained still, recognizing something profound in the boy's intense concentration. What stories lay behind those observant eyes that never spoke a word? Ruth Becker, approaching with a basket of fresh eggs, paused at the scene before her. She'd known Samuel since his birth, and had watched him retreat into silence after his father's death 3 years ago. Now, witnessing the boy's spontaneous artistic connection with their English visitor, she wondered if Anthony's presence might unlock something that the community had been unable to reach. Samuel's dedication to his art revealed itself through multiple sketches throughout the morning. Each drawing captured different aspects of Anthony, his contemplative expression, the way his hands folded while in thought, the slight tilt of his head when listening to the distant clip-clop of horse hooves on the road. The boy's talent proved remarkable, but even more striking was his choice of subject. Eli Zook discovered them later that morning, his weathered face softening at the sight of his grandson so deeply engaged. He'd spent countless hours praying for Samuel's voice to return, yet perhaps God's answer was arriving in an unexpected form. Through art, Samuel seemed to find a voice that transcended the need for words. Miriam Zook observed from the kitchen window while preparing the midday meal, her heart both aching and hopeful. Since losing her husband, she'd watched her son retreat further into his silent world. But something about their English visitor had sparked an interest she hadn't seen in years. Could this strange twist of fate, a celebrated actor seeking solitude in their simple community, somehow help her son find his way back? As the morning progressed, Caleb arrived to discuss the upcoming barn raising with Eli. His initial skepticism about their English visitor softened upon witnessing the quiet interaction between Anthony and Samuel. The young Amish leader recognized that sometimes the most profound connections required no words at all. Anthony found himself drawn into Samuel's artistic world, fascinated by how the boy's pencil transformed blank pages into windows of perception. Each sketch revealed not just what Samuel saw, but how he saw. The details he chose to emphasize, the emotions he captured in simple lines. Through these drawings, a dialogue began to form between them, one that needed no voice to carry its meaning. Ruth noticed how Anthony would occasionally shift his position, not out of discomfort, but to provide Samuel with new angles and expressions to capture. Their silent collaboration spoke volumes about the unexpected ways human beings could connect across vast differences in age, culture, and experience. What other surprises might emerge from this unlikely friendship? The morning's artistic session created ripples throughout the community. Word spread about Samuel's drawings, and soon other community members found excuses to pass by Eli's farm, curious about the English visitor who had somehow sparked such engagement from their quiet young neighbor. Each visitor left with a deeper appreciation for the mysterious ways in which God's grace could manifest. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel's pencil finally stilled. He carefully detached several pages from his sketchpad and, with shy determination, presented them to Anthony. The collection of drawings told a story, not just of their morning together, but of how Samuel perceived the world around him. What other observations lay locked behind his silence, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The gift of these sketches marked a turning point in Anthony's stay with the Zook family. Through Samuel's art, he began to see their world through new eyes. Not as an outsider looking in, but as someone worthy of being truly seen and understood. How would this silent connection continue to evolve, and what other revelations awaited in the days to come? The first hints of sunrise painted the Lancaster County sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Anthony stood among the gathering Amish men. The crisp autumn air carried whispers of conversation, and the occasional clink of tools being organized for the day's momentous task. How could such a diverse group, from teenagers to elderly men, work together to raise an entire barn in a single day? Caleb moved through the crowd with practiced authority, directing teams and assigning tasks. His eyes met Anthony's with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The English visitor's presence at a barn raising was unusual enough, but his age made several of the younger men exchange questioning glances. Anthony straightened his borrowed plain shirt, determined to prove his worth despite the silver in his hair. Eli appeared at Anthony's side, his weathered hands already covered in sawdust from the morning's preparations. "The English world believes in contracts and schedules," he said softly. "Here, we believe in the strength of many hands guided by one purpose." The elder's words carried no judgment, only an invitation to understand a different way of living. Ruth Becker arrived with baskets of fresh bread and coffee, her practical shoes already dusty from the walk across the fields. She caught Anthony's eye and offered an encouraging nod, understanding his desire to be more than just an observer. The women gathered near the outdoor kitchen area, where Miriam had already begun organizing the day's meals that would fuel the workers. Samuel lingered at the edge of the activity, his small notebook clutched in one hand as he watched the men prepare the massive support beams. His silent presence drew Anthony's attention, and the boy's intense focus on the proceedings sparked a revelation. Sometimes the most profound understanding came not from participation, but from careful observation. Work began with a rhythm as natural as breathing. Young men scrambled up scaffolding while their elders called out measurements in Pennsylvania Dutch. Anthony found himself working alongside a teenage boy who demonstrated knot-tying techniques without a single word of English, who needed language when the work itself spoke so clearly. Caleb's initial skepticism began to fade as he watched Anthony throw himself into the simpler tasks, carrying tools, holding boards steady, and learning the intricate dance of a community in motion. The young leader's commands became less clipped, more inclusive as the morning wore on. What had changed? Perhaps it was the shared sweat, the common purpose, or simply the universal language of honest work. As the sun climbed higher, the framework began to take shape against the autumn sky. Samuel's pencil moved across his paper, capturing the organized chaos in swift, sure strokes. His drawings revealed what many missed: the subtle interactions, the silent communications, the way each person anticipated the needs of others without being asked. Ruth approached the worksite periodically, offering water and quiet encouragement. Her presence served as a bridge between worlds, helping Anthony navigate the unspoken rules of Amish barn-raising etiquette. When would these two cultures stop seeing their differences and recognize their shared humanity? The morning's work revealed an unexpected truth to Anthony. In his world of carefully scripted performances and measured responses, he had forgotten the raw authenticity of physical labor. Here, among people who valued actions over words, he discovered a different kind of performance, one without audiences or applause, but with far deeper satisfaction. Miriam watched from her position near the food preparation area, her eyes frequently finding her son's perch on a nearby fence post. She saw how Samuel's attention alternated between his drawings and Anthony's determined efforts among the workers. What connections were being built alongside the barn's sturdy frames? As noon approached, the skeleton of the barn stood proudly against the sky. Eli gathered the workers for a brief rest, his quiet authority drawing everyone into a moment of shared appreciation. The morning's labor had transformed more than the landscape. It had begun to reshape understanding on all sides. But as the community gathered for the midday meal, new challenges and deeper revelations awaited. What would the afternoon bring as the barn raising reached its crucial stages? The smell of fresh bread and coffee mingled with sawdust and honest sweat, creating an atmosphere that transcended cultural boundaries. In this moment, surrounded by people who measured worth through actions rather than words, Anthony began to understand what had drawn him to this place. But could this understanding survive the demanding afternoon ahead? The morning sun climbed higher as Anthony wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscles already protesting the unfamiliar strain of manual labor. Who would have thought that passing wooden planks and holding support beams could demand such fortitude? His hands, more accustomed to holding scripts than construction materials, developed their first blisters within the initial hour. Caleb's watchful eyes tracked Anthony's movements from across the construction site, his expression a mixture of concern and mild skepticism. The young Amish leader had positioned Anthony among the less demanding tasks, yet even these proved challenging for the distinguished actor. How long could an English gentleman of Anthony's age maintain this pace? Ruth Becker noticed the silent exchange between the two men and quietly positioned herself nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Her presence provided an unspoken support that Anthony found comforting, though he remained determined to prove his worth without assistance. Each time he successfully completed a task, no matter how small, his resolve strengthened. The work grew more demanding as the morning progressed. Samuel, despite his young age, demonstrated remarkable efficiency in his assigned duties, occasionally casting encouraging glances toward Anthony. The boy's silent support spoke volumes, reminding Anthony of their shared understanding that actions often conveyed more meaning than words. Miriam Zook, working among the women preparing the midday meal, observed Anthony's determined efforts with growing respect. She recognized the same stubborn persistence she had often seen in her late husband, a quality that transcended the boundaries between their different worlds. Would this shared experience begin to bridge the cultural gap that initially seemed so vast? As the temperature rose, Eli Zook approached Anthony with a water dipper, his weathered face showing both concern and approval. "The English way isn't always the easier way, is it, friend?" he asked. Though his tone carried no judgment, Anthony accepted the water gratefully, noting how the simple act of sharing refreshment had become a moment of connection. The physical demands began taking their toll on Anthony's body, yet something deeper kept him moving forward. Each beam lifted, each nail hammered became more than just construction tasks. They transformed into steps on an unexpected journey of personal discovery. What was it about this simple, strenuous work that seemed to strip away the layers of his carefully constructed public persona? Caleb's initial skepticism gradually shifted as he witnessed Anthony's unwavering commitment. The young leader began incorporating Anthony more fully into the work, assigning him increasingly meaningful tasks despite his limitations. This subtle shift didn't go unnoticed by the community members, who responded by offering their own quiet encouragement. The morning's labor revealed an unexpected truth to Anthony. Physical trials often served as pathways to deeper understanding. His aching muscles and calloused hands became badges of belonging, earning him a different kind of respect than his acclaimed acting career had ever provided. How had manual labor, something he'd never previously valued, become such a powerful teacher? Ruth watched this transformation with knowing eyes, understanding that Anthony's struggle was about more than just helping with the barn raising. Each moment of physical challenge peeled away another layer of the barrier between him and the community. Could these shared experiences of sweat and toil accomplish what words and intentions alone could not? Samuel's presence throughout the morning served as a constant reminder of authenticity. The boy's efficient movements, unhindered by the need for verbal communication, demonstrated a pure form of contribution that Anthony found himself striving to emulate. What could be learned from this child who spoke volumes through actions alone? As the morning wore on, Anthony's body screamed for rest, yet his spirit felt increasingly energized. The paradox wasn't lost on him: how physical exhaustion could somehow feed an inner strength he hadn't known he possessed. The barn's framework continued to rise, but perhaps something else was being built alongside it. A bridge between two worlds, constructed not of wood and nails, but of shared purpose and mutual respect. In the quiet hours before dawn, Samuel Zook sat at his small wooden desk, illuminated by a single oil lamp. His small hands moved deliberately across a piece of plain paper, each stroke of the pencil purposeful and precise. What drove this young mute boy to capture this particular moment? The previous day's events had left an indelible impression on the community, particularly on Samuel, who had watched Sir Anthony Hopkins work alongside the others despite his obvious physical limitations. The boy's keen eyes had observed everything. The way Anthony's hands, more accustomed to holding scripts than hammers, had gradually found their rhythm in the day's labor. The way his sophisticated demeanor had given way to something more fundamental, more genuine. Through Samuel's artistic gift, a story emerged on paper. The sketch showed Anthony not as the world knew him, not as the celebrated actor or cultural icon, but as something entirely different. His figure appeared among the other workers, sleeves rolled up, hat askew, helping to raise the new barn's framework. Samuel's pencil had captured the transformation in Anthony's eyes, a subtle shift from uncertainty to determination. Ruth Becker discovered the drawing first, having arrived early to help Miriam with the morning's tasks. The detail in Samuel's work struck her immediately. How had such young hands rendered such complexity? The boy had somehow managed to convey not just the physical scene, but the emotional weight of the moment. What made this particular instant so significant in Samuel's mind? When Eli Zook saw his grandson's creation, his weathered face softened with understanding. The drawing showed more than just Anthony's participation in their work. It revealed his integration into their world. In the sketch, Anthony stood shoulder to shoulder with Caleb, their former tensions invisible as they worked toward a common goal. How had Samuel perceived this subtle shift in their relationship? Miriam watched her son's face as others examined his work, noting the quiet pride in his eyes. Though Samuel couldn't speak, his art had given voice to something profound. The drawing depicted not just the physical labor but the spiritual transformation taking place within Anthony. Each pencil stroke seemed to strip away another layer of the outside world's influence, revealing the simpler, more essential nature beneath. Caleb's reaction to the drawing proved particularly telling. His initial skepticism toward Anthony had evolved into something approaching respect, and Samuel's artwork captured this evolution perfectly. The young Amish leader stood studying the sketch, noting how Samuel had positioned him and Anthony as equals in the scene, both committed to the same purpose. What had changed in Caleb's perception of their English visitor? The drawing began to circulate among the community members, each finding something meaningful in its simple lines. Some noted the accuracy of the barn's structure, others the careful attention to the workers' expressions. But most remarkable was how Samuel had captured the sense of community, the way each figure seemed connected to the others through invisible threads of shared purpose and mutual support. Anthony himself came upon the drawing later that morning, finding it carefully placed on the small table beside his bed. His reaction revealed the impact of Samuel's perspective, how different it was to see himself through the eyes of this perceptive child. The drawing showed him not as an outsider trying to fit in, but as an integral part of the scene, his contributions as valuable as any others. The artwork sparked conversations throughout the day, though not in the usual way of the English world. Instead of critiquing technique or style, the community focused on what the drawing revealed about their collective experience. How had this silent boy managed to capture something so intangible? What did his perspective reveal about their own understanding of community and acceptance? Ruth observed how the drawing affected Anthony, noting the way he kept returning to study it throughout the day. What did he see in those careful lines that moved him so deeply? Perhaps it was the first time he had seen himself as others truly saw him, not as Sir Anthony Hopkins, the acclaimed actor, but simply as Anthony, a man working alongside his neighbors, contributing what he could to their shared endeavor. As evening approached, Samuel's drawing had become more than just a sketch. It had evolved into a kind of testament to the week's transformations. Through the eyes of a child, the community saw their own capacity for acceptance and change. How had this simple piece of art managed to capture something so profound about their shared experience? The drawing found a permanent home on the wall of Eli's study, where it continued to speak volumes without uttering a single word, much like its young creator. What other insights lay hidden in Samuel's silent observations of their world? As dusk settled over the Amish farmland, Anthony found himself seated across from Ruth Becker in her modest home just outside the community proper. The gentle flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere conducive to the kind of deep conversation that had been building within him throughout the week. Ruth poured tea from an old ceramic pot, the aromatic steam rising between them as Anthony struggled to articulate the profound changes he'd experienced. How could he explain the way Samuel's simple drawing had shaken loose something fundamental in his understanding of himself? The sketch, showing him working alongside the community members, had captured more than just his physical presence. It had somehow illustrated the transformation he felt taking place within. "You know, Ruth," Anthony began, his voice carrying the weight of careful consideration, "I came here thinking I understood what it meant to be successful, to achieve something meaningful. But watching Samuel today, the way he sees the world through his silence." He paused, taking a thoughtful sip of tea. "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Ruth leaned forward slightly, her experienced eyes reading the subtle shifts in Anthony's demeanor. Having served as a bridge between the English and Amish worlds for years, she recognized the telltale signs of someone grappling with the stark contrasts between these two ways of life. What insights had this celebrated actor gleaned from his time among the plain people? The conversation deepened as Anthony shared his observations about Eli's patient wisdom, Miriam's quiet strength, and Caleb's evolution from skepticism to acceptance. But it was his connection with Samuel that seemed to touch something profound within him. The boy's wordless understanding had stripped away the layers of pretense that Anthony had accumulated throughout his career. "There's something almost frightening about being seen so clearly," Anthony admitted, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. "Samuel doesn't care about my awards or my reputation. He simply sees." He trailed off, searching for the right words. Ruth nodded, understanding the unspoken completion of that thought. She had witnessed similar transformations in others who had spent time among the Amish, though perhaps none quite as dramatic as Anthony's. What was it about this community that had the power to reshape one's perspective so fundamentally? The conversation turned to the upcoming barn raising, and Anthony shared his apprehensions about participating in such a significant community event. Would his presence be seen as intrusive? How could he contribute meaningfully without overstepping cultural boundaries? Ruth's response carried the wisdom of someone who had long navigated these delicate cultural intersections. She spoke of the Amish concept of Gelassenheit, the yielding of oneself to a higher purpose, and how it manifested in their communal work. Could this be what Anthony had been unconsciously seeking in his journey here? As the evening progressed, their discussion touched upon the various ways Anthony had begun to question his own definitions of success and fulfillment. The simplicity of Amish life had revealed the complexity of his own internal struggles. How had he never noticed the weight of his public persona until he'd experienced the freedom of being simply present, without expectation or pretense? The candle burned lower as Anthony described the moment earlier that day, when he'd watched Samuel sketching, completely absorbed in his art. There was something pure in that observation, something that reminded him of his own early days of acting, before the acclaim and expectations had complicated his relationship with his craft. Ruth listened intently, occasionally offering insights that helped Anthony contextualize his experiences within the broader framework of Amish values and beliefs. What would he take back with him to his world of bright lights and constant scrutiny? How would these lessons reshape his approach to his art and his life? As the evening drew to a close, Anthony found himself reluctant to leave the comfortable space of honest reflection they had created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges with the barn raising, but tonight had provided something equally valuable: the opportunity to voice the profound changes taking place within him, guided by someone who understood both the world he came from and the one he was discovering. What neither of them could have anticipated was how these evening reflections would influence the events of the following day, as the entire community came together for the barn raising. How would Anthony's newfound insights manifest when faced with the ultimate test of community, cooperation, and trust? The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden floor of Eli's workshop as Samuel guided Anthony's fingers into deliberate shapes. Who would have thought that a mute Amish boy could become such an effective teacher? The unlikely pair sat facing each other on rough-hewn stools, their concentration evident in their furrowed brows and careful movements. Samuel's patience proved remarkable as he corrected Anthony's clumsy attempts at fingerspelling. The boy's small hands moved with practiced grace, demonstrating each letter multiple times until Anthony could mirror the movements. What started as simple letters gradually evolved into basic words, creating a bridge of understanding between two souls who had initially connected through silence. Ruth observed from the workshop doorway, her presence both supportive and unobtrusive. She noticed how Samuel's eyes lit up whenever Anthony successfully replicated a sign, the boy's silent approval more powerful than any spoken praise. Could this newfound language be healing something in both of them? The lesson progressed beyond the alphabet as Samuel introduced everyday objects through signs. A cup, a book, a chair, each item in the workshop became an opportunity for learning. Anthony's corporate world of boardrooms and smartphones seemed increasingly distant as he immersed himself in this fundamental form of human communication. How had he lived so long without understanding the eloquence of silence? Eli appeared briefly, carrying freshly carved wooden bowls, his weathered hands testament to years of craftsmanship. He paused to watch his grandson teaching the Englisher, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The scene before him represented everything he valued about his community: patience, sharing of knowledge, and the building of genuine connections. Miriam, passing by with a basket of fresh laundry, slowed her pace to observe the interaction. Her initial reservations about Anthony's presence had softened as she witnessed these moments between him and her son. Samuel's enthusiasm for teaching seemed to bring out a new confidence in him, one that she had always hoped would emerge. Ensuing morning lesson extended into the afternoon, punctuated by moments of breakthrough and shared silent laughter. Anthony's hands grew more confident with each passing hour, though they still lacked the fluid grace of Samuel's movements. The boy introduced more complex concepts, emotions, actions, and simple phrases that could express basic needs and thoughts. Caleb, who had been skeptical of Anthony's presence in their community, found himself drawn to the workshop's entrance. What he witnessed challenged his preconceptions about the English visitor. Here was a man of considerable worldly success humbling himself to learn from a child, and doing so with genuine dedication. Ruth occasionally translated more complex concepts, when Samuel's signs alone couldn't bridge the gap, but these interventions became less frequent as the day progressed. The boy had an intuitive understanding of how to communicate with Anthony, using gestures and expressions that transcended both spoken and signed language. As the afternoon light began to fade, Samuel introduced Anthony to signs for family members. The sign for grandfather brought a particular sparkle to the boy's eyes as he pointed to Eli's workshop. Anthony realized that these weren't just arbitrary gestures, they were windows into Samuel's world, his relationships, his understanding of community. The lesson concluded with Samuel teaching Anthony the signs for friend and thank you. These final gestures carried special weight, marking not just the end of a lesson but the deepening of a connection. Could it be that in teaching Anthony to speak with his hands, Samuel had also taught him to listen with his heart? The workshop gradually emptied as Samuel departed with his mother for evening chores, leaving Anthony alone with his thoughts and newly acquired knowledge. His fingers continued to move, practicing the day's lessons, each gesture a reminder of the silent wisdom he had gained. In the growing dusk, Anthony pondered how this simple language of hands and heart might be reshaping his understanding of communication itself. Ruth lingered at the workshop door, watching Anthony practice. What transformations might this new language bring to both teacher and student? The answer lay in the days ahead, as Anthony's journey in the Amish community continued to unfold through these silent lessons of understanding and connection. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Sir Anthony Hopkins stood at the edge of Eli Zook's property, his weathered hands gripping the wooden fence. The air held an electric charge that made the hairs on his neck stand up, nature's warning system alerting him to the impending danger. But something else troubled him beyond the approaching weather, a nagging sensation that this storm would test more than just the physical structures of the Amish community. Samuel appeared beside him, his small hand tugging at Anthony's sleeve. Using the signs they'd practiced together, the boy conveyed his concern about the horses in the far pasture. Anthony nodded, understanding the urgency in the child's gestures. Together they moved toward the barn, where Caleb was already organizing the community's response to the threatening weather. Inside the barn, Eli Zook's commanding presence drew everyone's attention as he coordinated with Caleb to ensure the community's safety. The younger man's initial skepticism toward Anthony had evolved into a quiet respect, evidenced by the way he now included the English visitor in their preparations. The English Weather Service, Caleb explained, having heard the report from Ruth earlier that morning, warns of severe winds and possible flooding. Miriam Zook moved efficiently through the barn, gathering supplies and checking the integrity of the structure. Her practiced movements spoke of previous experiences with nature's fury, yet concern shadowed her face as she watched Samuel helping Anthony secure the livestock. The bond between her son and the English visitor had grown stronger each day, surprising everyone, including Anthony himself. Ruth Becker arrived with additional news from the outside world, her usually calm demeanor tinged with worry. "The storm system is larger than initially predicted," she informed Eli, who listened intently while directing younger community members to reinforce the barn doors. The Englishwoman's presence had become invaluable in situations like these, bridging the gap between the modern world's technology and the Amish community's traditional ways of reading nature's signs. As thunder rolled in the distance, Anthony found himself drawn into the community's well-orchestrated emergency response. The efficiency of their preparation stood in stark contrast to the chaos he'd witnessed in the outside world during similar situations. Here, each person knew their role, moved with purpose, and supported one another without question or complaint. Samuel's hand signals had become more confident over the past days, and now he used them to help coordinate between different groups working throughout the property. Anthony watched in amazement as the young boy's silence became an asset rather than a hindrance, his clear gestures cutting through the growing wind and nervous energy with precise meaning. Eli approached Anthony as the community continued their preparations. "In times like these," the elder said, his voice carrying wisdom earned through countless seasons, "we are reminded of our true strength." He paused, watching Samuel direct several young men with his hand signals. "It lies not in our individual abilities but in how we come together." The storm's approach had revealed layers of community organization that Anthony hadn't previously observed. Caleb's leadership style complemented Eli's experience, while Miriam's practical knowledge helped bridge generational gaps in the response effort. Even Ruth, technically an outsider like Anthony, had found her place in the community's emergency procedures. As the wind intensified and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, Anthony realized that this storm might offer more than just physical challenges. The approaching tempest would test the bonds that had formed during his stay, pushing relationships beyond their comfortable limits. Would his growing connection with Samuel weather the storm? How would the community's traditional methods hold up against nature's modern fury? The barn creaked ominously as gusts of wind tested its ancient timbers. Anthony caught Samuel's eye across the space, And the boy's confident smile reminded him that sometimes the strongest communications require no words at all. Together, they turned to face whatever challenges the storm might bring, part of a community that had already taught Anthony more about strength and unity than he'd learned in all his years in the English world. The first drops of rain fell like scattered coins on the half-constructed barn's wooden beams, a prelude to what would become one of Lancaster County's most devastating summer storms. Sir Anthony Hopkins stood alongside Eli Zook at the edge of the construction site, both men watching as dark clouds rolled across the Pennsylvania sky with menacing intent. Throughout the community, families rushed to secure their properties. Caleb orchestrated the emergency efforts, his voice carrying above the strengthening wind, as he directed young men to reinforce the vulnerable framework of the barn. The structure, barely halfway complete, stood exposed to the elements like an unfinished symphony. Miriam Zook hurried young Samuel inside their home, but the boy's eyes remained fixed on Anthony through the window, his small hands pressed against the glass. The connection between them, wordless yet profound, seemed to intensify with each flash of lightning that illuminated the darkening landscape. Ruth Becker arrived in her car, defying the weather to assist the community. She worked alongside the Amish women who gathered supplies and prepared the basement of Eli's house as a shelter. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn's incomplete walls, creating an eerie whistle that seemed to mock their previous days of progress. The storm's intensity grew with frightening speed. Thunder cracked overhead as Anthony and Eli helped Caleb secure loose boards that threatened to become projectiles in the strengthening gusts. The rain now fell in sheets, drenching them to the bone as they worked. Would their efforts prove sufficient against nature's onslaught? Somewhere in the distance, a massive tree branch snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The noise sent Samuel running from the window into his mother's arms, while Ruth organized blankets and lanterns in preparation for a possible power outage. The community's response to crisis revealed itself in silent efficiency and coordinated purpose. The barn's framework groaned under the assault of wind and rain. Caleb's face, usually composed, showed hints of concern as he assessed the structure's integrity. Years of experience had taught the Amish to respect nature's power, but this storm tested even their stoic acceptance of forces beyond human control. Anthony found himself working instinctively alongside the Amish men, passing tools and materials, without need for instruction. The previous day's labor had taught him their rhythms and methods. In crisis, the distinctions between English and Amish blurred, replaced by the simple imperative of preservation and survival. Ruth moved between groups, translating when necessary but mostly allowing the universal language of emergency to guide their collective actions. Her presence provided a subtle bridge between Anthony's world and the Amish community, though at this moment, such divisions seemed remarkably insignificant. A sudden gust ripped through the construction site, sending loose planks flying. Eli's quick thinking saved Anthony from injury, pulling him back just as a board whistled past. The elder's strength, belying his age, reminded Anthony that the Amish lifestyle fostered a resilience often lacking in the modern world. The storm's fury reached its peak as darkness fell. The half-built barn swayed ominously, its incomplete structure vulnerable to the wind's relentless assault. Could the community's work withstand nature's challenge? Or would days of collective effort be undone in a single night of tempestuous violence? Inside Eli's house, Samuel watched the storm through brief glimpses between lightning flashes, his face reflecting both fear and fascination. Miriam kept him close, while Ruth helped organize emergency supplies and offered quiet words of comfort to worried children gathered in the basement. The night stretched on, marked by the rhythmic pounding of rain and the occasional crash of thunder. Anthony remained outside with Caleb and other men, their bodies leaning into the wind as they fought to protect what they had built. The storm tested not just the physical structure of the barn, but the bonds of community that had drawn them together in its construction. Through the darkness and chaos, Anthony realized that this crisis had stripped away the last barriers between himself and the Amish community. In facing nature's fury together, they had discovered a deeper truth about strength, unity, and the fundamental connections that bind all human beings in times of trial. The morning after the storm revealed nature's raw power. As Anthony stood, alongside Samuel, surveying the scattered remnants of their collective labor. The half-constructed barn lay partially collapsed, its wooden beams strewn across the muddy ground like discarded matchsticks. Yet in Samuel's unwavering gaze, Anthony recognized not defeat, but quiet determination. Through the misty dawn, other community members began arriving, their black buggies appearing one by one along the rural road. Eli Zook's weathered face carried no trace of despair as he approached, placing a gentle hand on Samuel's shoulder. The boy's response, a simple nod, spoke volumes about the Amish spirit that Anthony had come to admire during his stay. Ruth Becker arrived shortly after, her practical English clothing standing out among the traditional Amish dress. She immediately began organizing the women who were setting up a food station, understanding that the day's work would require sustained energy. Her occasional glances toward Anthony carried unspoken encouragement, recognizing how this setback had affected him more deeply than he'd expected. Caleb, who had initially viewed Anthony with skepticism, now approached him with a blueprint in hand. The young Amish leader had spent the early morning hours revising their construction plans, adapting them to salvage what remained usable from the storm's destruction. His inclusion of Anthony in these discussions marked a significant shift in their relationship, born from shared adversity. Miriam Zook moved efficiently between groups, her quiet strength evident in how she coordinated efforts without drawing attention to herself. She paused briefly beside Samuel, who had begun sorting through fallen lumber with surprising methodical precision. The boy's ability to find purpose in chaos touched Anthony deeply, challenging his own tendency to seek control in all situations. As the community mobilized, Anthony found himself working alongside Samuel, developing an unspoken system of communication. The boy would point to salvageable materials, and Anthony would help categorize them. Their silent partnership drew curious glances from others, particularly from Eli, who observed how his grandson's natural reticence had transformed into purposeful interaction. The day progressed within rhythm that seemed to emerge naturally from the collective effort. Ruth occasionally brought water to the workers, her presence serving as a bridge between Anthony's world and the Amish way of life. During one such moment, she shared insights about how the community viewed setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities for growth and unity. Caleb's leadership style revealed itself through subtle gestures rather than bold declarations. He moved among the workers, adjusting their efforts with minimal intervention, demonstrating a form of authority that Anthony had rarely encountered in his previous experiences. The young leader's approach sparked questions about the nature of true influence and the power of quiet guidance. By mid-afternoon, Samuel had discovered something remarkable among the debris, the original cornerstone, completely intact. His discovery prompted Eli to gather everyone around, speaking words in Pennsylvania Dutch that, while incomprehensible to Anthony, clearly carried deep meaning for the community. Ruth quietly translated the essence. The cornerstone's survival symbolized the foundation of their faith and resilience. Miriam's practical response to this moment reflected her character. She immediately began organizing teams to clear the path toward rebuilding, starting from this surviving cornerstone. Her efficiency inspired others, including Anthony, who found himself naturally falling into step with the community's rhythm, rather than trying to impose his own pace. The day's work revealed how Samuel's silence often spoke louder than words. His methodical approach to sorting and salvaging materials demonstrated a wisdom beyond his years, teaching Anthony that communication transcends verbal expression. Their shared task became a lesson in finding meaning through action rather than explanation. As evening approached, the site had transformed from a scene of destruction to one of possibility. Organized piles of salvaged materials stood ready for the next day's efforts, while cleared spaces marked where new construction would begin. The community's response to adversity had shifted Anthony's perspective on what constitutes progress and success. Ruth's final observations before departing captured the day's essence: how destruction had paradoxically strengthened bonds within the community and deepened understanding between cultures. Her words resonated with Anthony, who had witnessed firsthand how crisis could reveal the true character of both individuals and communities. The sun's setting rays cast long shadows across the worksite as Samuel and Anthony completed their final tasks. Their shared experience had evolved beyond mere cleanup duty into a profound lesson about resilience, community, and the power of purposeful silence. What began as a day of salvaging materials had transformed into an opportunity for salvaging hope itself. As dawn broke over the recovering Amish community, Sir Anthony Hopkins found himself seated across from Eli Zook in the elder's modest workshop. The previous day's efforts to salvage what remained after the storm had left everyone exhausted, yet somehow renewed. Through the window, Anthony watched Samuel helping his mother Miriam hang freshly washed linens, their movements synchronized in the morning breeze. "Does thee know why we choose simplicity?" Eli's question drew Anthony's attention back to the workshop, where the elder's weathered hands continued crafting a delicate wooden music box. The intricate piece seemed at odds with the Amish reputation for utilitarian design. The question stirred something deep within Anthony. How often had he pondered the paradox of the Amish way of life, their deliberate choice to live without modern conveniences while the world raced forward at breakneck speed, had initially struck him as primitive. Now, after witnessing their response to adversity, he recognized a profound wisdom in their approach. Eli continued working as he spoke, his chisel making precise cuts into the cedar wood. In the English world, everything is temporary: phones, cars, even homes, all designed to be replaced. But here we build things to last generations. He paused, testing the lid's smooth movement. When my great-grandfather built this workshop, he chose each beam with the thought that his great-grandchildren would work beneath them. The conversation shifted as Ruth Becker appeared at the doorway, carrying a basket of fresh bread. She placed it quietly on the workbench and exchanged knowing glances with both men before departing. Her brief presence reminded Anthony of how she had helped bridge his understanding of these two worlds he now straddled. Young Caleb questioned my decision to let thee stay with us, Eli revealed, surprising Anthony. He feared thy presence would disturb our ways. But I told him that sometimes we must risk change to preserve what matters most. The elder's eyes crinkled with gentle amusement. Besides, Samuel had already chosen thee as his friend. Anthony reflected on his silent companionship with the young boy. Their wordless understanding had taught him more about genuine communication than decades in the entertainment industry. "How does one preserve what matters while the world demands constant change?" he asked, voicing a question that had haunted him throughout his career. Eli set down his tools and reached for a leather-bound book on a nearby shelf. "This is my grandfather's journal. His words about faith, family, and community remain true today, not because they were preserved in ink, but because each generation lived them." He opened the journal, revealing pages of careful German script. "We don't reject progress, Anthony. We question whether it serves what endures." The conversation deepened as Eli shared stories of his community's history, tales of hardship, joy, and unwavering faith. Each narrative illustrated how the Amish approach to permanence had protected not just their way of life, but the essential human connections that modern convenience often eroded. Outside, they could hear Miriam singing a hymn as she worked, her voice carrying the same melodies that had echoed through these fields for generations. Samuel's rhythmic movements matched his mother's song, though he couldn't voice the words himself. The scene embodied everything Eli had been trying to convey about permanence and legacy. "Thee has spent thy life creating stories that move people's hearts," Eli observed, returning to his craftsmanship. "But what moves thy own heart, Anthony? What legacy does thee wish to leave?" The question wasn't accusatory, but rather an invitation to deeper reflection. Anthony watched as Eli's skilled hands transformed raw wood into something beautiful and lasting. The music box was more than a craft project. It was a physical manifestation of the elder's philosophy. Every cut, every joint, every detail was made with the understanding that this object would outlive its creator, bringing joy to future generations. The morning light shifted, casting new shadows across the workshop floor. In this simple space, surrounded by tools that had shaped wood for decades, Anthony began to understand that true legacy wasn't found in accolades or achievements, but in the lasting impact one had on others' lives. How had his own choices contributed to something permanent? What would remain after the applause faded and the credits rolled? As dawn broke over the Lancaster countryside, the rhythmic clip-clop of horse hooves marked the arrival of dozens of Amish families converging on the Zook farm. The atmosphere crackled with purposeful energy as men in traditional dark clothing and broad-brimmed hats gathered around Caleb, who had already begun organizing the day's monumental task. Sir Anthony Hopkins stood quietly beside Eli Zook, watching the systematic precision with which the community mobilized. How could such a massive undertaking proceed without modern machinery or technology? The answer unfolded before him as teams naturally formed, each person knowing their role without need for extensive direction. Ruth Becker appeared at Anthony's side, her presence a familiar comfort in this sea of coordinated activity. "They've done this countless times before," she explained softly. "Each barn raising is like a well-rehearsed dance." The Englishwoman's understanding of both worlds helped Anthony appreciate the deeper significance of what was unfolding. Young Samuel, Zook darted between the workers, his small hands eager to contribute wherever possible. Though unable to speak, his eyes shone with excitement as he passed tools to the men and carried water to those already at work. Anthony noticed how the community seamlessly incorporated the boy's silent assistance, treating his contributions with the same respect accorded to any other member. Miriam Zook emerged from the house carrying baskets of fresh bread and preserves, joined by other women who had brought additional provisions. The sight of their coordinated efforts reminded Anthony of medieval guilds, where each person's role contributed to the greater whole. What secrets of community lay hidden in this seemingly simple approach to life? Caleb's initial cool demeanor toward Anthony had thawed considerably over the past days, and now he approached with an unexpected request. "We could use another pair of hands on the support beams," he said, gesturing toward where several men were already positioning massive wooden posts. The invitation represented more than just a need for labor. It was an acceptance into the community's inner circle. As Anthony joined the work crew, the physical demands of the task surprised him. Every beam, every board, every nail required precise coordination between multiple people. The absence of power tools meant each action relied on human strength and cooperation. Through the strain and sweat, Anthony began to understand why such work bound people together more effectively than any modern team-building exercise. Eli moved through the growing framework of the barn, offering quiet words of encouragement and occasionally sharing brief stories of previous barn raisings. His presence served as a reminder of the continuity between past and present, between the generations who had performed this same ritual countless times before. Ruth found moments to photograph the proceedings, careful to respect the community's preferences about images. Her documentation would serve as a bridge between worlds, helping others understand the power of collective action. But could any photograph truly capture the spirit of what was happening here? The morning progressed into afternoon as the barn's skeleton took shape against the sky. Samuel appeared periodically at Anthony's side, his silent presence offering water or tools at just the right moments. The boy's intuitive understanding of others' needs reflected a wisdom that transcended spoken language. Miriam coordinated the meal preparations with other women, their efficient systems ensuring that workers could take brief breaks without disrupting the overall flow of construction. The sight of her confident leadership in this domain revealed another facet of Amish society's carefully balanced roles. As the sun climbed higher, Anthony found himself fully immersed in the rhythm of the work. The physical demands faded into the background as he experienced something he had rarely encountered in his professional life: the profound satisfaction of creating something tangible alongside others who shared the same purpose. What was it about this simple act of building that spoke so deeply to the human spirit? The barn raising continued with the precision of a complex timepiece, each person's efforts meshing with others to create a symphony of purposeful activity. Through it all, Anthony observed how the community's strength lay not in individual excellence but in their ability to work as one unified body. Could this be what he had been searching for all along? Not answers about silence, but about connection. The midday sun cast long shadows across the barn's rising framework as Anthony wiped sweat from his brow. his hands calloused from hours of labor alongside the Amish men. Who would have thought that a celebrated actor would find himself here, learning the intricate dance of barn raising from people who had perfected it through generations? Caleb approached Anthony, carrying 2 wooden beams with practiced ease. The young Amish leader's initial skepticism had gradually transformed over the past few days, replaced by something that resembled genuine curiosity. The English way of building relies too heavily on machines, Caleb remarked, his voice carrying no judgment, only observation. But how can one truly understand the strength of wood without feeling its grain beneath bare hands? Anthony found himself nodding, recalling how his own understanding of craftsmanship had shifted since arriving in the community. The sophisticated power tools he'd once considered essential now seemed like barriers between craftsman and creation. Through Caleb's patient guidance, he'd learned to read the language of wood, its knots, grain patterns, and natural inclinations. Ruth Becker watched from the sidelines, her presence a subtle reminder of the bridge between 2 worlds. She caught Anthony's eye and smiled knowingly, remembering their earlier conversations about his struggle to find authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. What better teachers of authenticity than these people who lived it daily? Eli Zook supervised the work from nearby, his weathered hands gesturing as he directed the younger men. His grandson Samuel stayed close, his silent presence a constant reminder of the different ways people could communicate. The boy's eyes followed Anthony's movements with keen interest, occasionally mimicking his gestures when he thought no one was watching. As the afternoon progressed, Caleb and Anthony found themselves working on the same section of the barn's upper structure. Their movements fell into a natural rhythm, one holding while the other secured, passing tools without need for words. The simple efficiency of their partnership spoke volumes about how far they'd come from their first awkward encounters. Miriam, Zook arrived with other women, carrying baskets of food for the workers. She paused briefly, observing the unlikely pair working together, her face softening at the sight. How strange yet fitting that her father's decision to welcome this English stranger had led to such unexpected harmony. The work continued as the sun began its descent, but the conversation between Caleb and Anthony deepened. They discussed the importance of community, the value of tradition, and the power of shared purpose. Caleb spoke of his initial reservations about Anthony's presence, while Anthony admitted his own preconceptions about the Amish way of life. Their exchange drew others into its orbit, young Amish men who had questions about the outside world, older ones who shared wisdom about maintaining one's principles in changing times. The barn's skeleton rose steadily around them, each beam and board a testament to their growing understanding. Ruth occasionally translated nuances of culture and custom, but increasingly, Anthony and Caleb found ways to bridge the gap themselves. They discovered common ground in their appreciation for craftsmanship, their respect for tradition, and their recognition of the sacred in the everyday. As evening approached, Samuel brought water to the workers, his expressive eyes conveying what his voice could not. He lingered near Anthony and Caleb, absorbing their newfound camaraderie. The boy's presence reminded them both of the legacy they were building, not just in the physical structure of the barn, but in the bridges being formed between different ways of life. The day's work drew to a close with a sense of accomplishment that transcended the mere physical progress of the barn. Caleb extended his hand to Anthony, a gesture that carried weight in its simplicity. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you how we raise the center beam. It requires many hands, but more importantly, it requires trust." Anthony grasped the offered hand, understanding that this moment marked more than just the end of a day's labor. What had begun as a week of observation had transformed into active participation in something far more meaningful than he had anticipated. How many other revelations awaited in the days to come? Silent Stories unfolds as a profound exploration of wordless communication, centered around the unlikely connection between Sir Anthony Hopkins and young Samuel Zook. Their unique bond, forged through shared silence, reveals how understanding transcends traditional speech. During a crisp autumn morning, Anthony observed Samuel feeding the chickens behind the Zook farmhouse. The boy's methodical movements and gentle interaction with The birds speak volumes without uttering a single word. What catches Anthony's attention isn't just Samuel's actions, but the intricate way the child communicates his intentions through subtle gestures and expressions. Ruth Becker, watching from the kitchen window, notices Anthony's intense focus on Samuel's activities. She recognizes something familiar in their interaction, a language developing between them that requires no voice. Could this be the breakthrough Anthony has been seeking during his stay with the Amish community? The relationship between Anthony and Samuel deepens as they spend more time together, with Samuel teaching Anthony his own form of sign language, not the formal kind taught in schools, but a personal dialect born from necessity and creativity. Through raised eyebrows, slight nods, and hand movements, they create their own vocabulary. Eli Zook observes their growing connection with quiet approval, understanding that sometimes the most meaningful lessons come without instruction. Miriam. Zook initially watches their interaction with maternal concern, but her worry transforms into appreciation as she witnesses her son's confidence growing through his role as teacher. For perhaps the first time, Samuel's silence becomes a strength rather than a limitation. How many others had overlooked this gift, seeing only what was missing rather than what was present? During one particularly meaningful afternoon, Samuel leads Anthony to the barn, where they encounter a newborn calf struggling to stand. Without exchanging words, they work in perfect synchronization to help the wobbly animal find its footing. Their shared experience demonstrates how actions and presence often communicate more effectively than words ever could. Caleb, still adjusting to his evolving perspective of Anthony, finds himself intrigued by the silent exchanges between the English visitor and Samuel. He begins to recognize that leadership doesn't always require vocal authority, a lesson that challenges his traditional understanding of guidance and influence. The impact of this wordless mentorship extends beyond Samuel and Anthony's immediate interaction. Other community members notice the change in Samuel's demeanor, his shoulders straight, his eyes bright with purpose. The boy who once seemed trapped by his silence now moves through the community with quiet confidence, teaching others that communication exists in many forms. Ruth takes particular interest in documenting these interactions, recognizing their significance beyond the immediate. She observes how Anthony's celebrity status and accomplished speaking career fade into irrelevance as he masters this new language of silence. What wisdom might the wider world gain from understanding that true connection often lies in the spaces between words? Eli shares with Ruth his observation that Samuel has begun teaching other children his special signs, creating a ripple effect of understanding throughout the younger generation. The elder's eyes twinkle with appreciation for how this unexpected partnership has enriched his grandson's life, and, by extension, the entire community. As the days progress, Anthony finds himself increasingly fluent in this wordless dialogue. He discovers that his years of acting, of expressing emotion through gesture and expression, have prepared him well for this new form of communication. Yet Samuel's teachings go beyond mere physical expression. They encompass a deeper understanding of presence, patience, and the art of truly seeing others. The transformation becomes most apparent during community gatherings, where Samuel and Anthony move in tandem, their silent communication drawing curious and appreciative glances. Their example challenges the community's preconceptions about disability and difference, suggesting that perhaps what some view as limitations might actually be alternate pathways to understanding. This silent mentorship evolves into something more profound than either participant initially imagined. Through their shared language, both teacher and student discover new dimensions of human connection. What other revelations await in the quiet spaces between spoken words? How might this understanding reshape their perspectives on communication, community, and the very nature of human connection? Their story becomes a testament to the power of openness and humility in learning, proving that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. What began as a curious interaction between an accomplished actor and a silent child transforms into a lesson about the multiple languages of human understanding. In the soft glow of an oil lamp, Anthony's weathered hands moved methodically across a piece of maple wood, each careful stroke of the carving knife revealing the form hidden within. The craft had always called to him, but never had he felt such purpose in shaping wood as he did now, creating something special for young Samuel Zook. Ruth Becker watched from the doorway of Eli's workshop, her presence gentle and unobtrusive. She understood the significance of what Anthony was attempting, a bridge built not of words but of shared understanding. What could speak more clearly to a silent child than a gift fashioned by hands that had learned to listen? The project had begun 3 days earlier when Eli Zook had discovered Anthony admiring the traditional Amish carvings in the community workshop. The elder's eyes had lit up with recognition of a kindred spirit seeking expression through craft. Without hesitation, Eli had offered Anthony the use of his tools and a choice piece of maple that had been waiting for the right purpose. Miriam Zook had noticed the subtle changes in Anthony since he began working on the mysterious project. His movements had become more deliberate, his attention more focused, as if the act of carving had grounded him in the present moment. She observed how he would pause occasionally, closing his eyes as if listening to the wood itself, much like Samuel did when encountering something new. Caleb, initially skeptical of the English visitor's presence in their community, found himself drawn to the workshop more frequently. The young Amish leader recognized in Anthony's dedication to the craft the same patience and respect for tradition that he valued in his own people. What had started as curiosity evolved into quiet appreciation as he witnessed the transformation of both the wood and the man working it. The carving took shape slowly, deliberately. Anthony's hands, more accustomed to holding scripts than carving tools, learned the language of wood grain and blade angle. Each mistake became a lesson, each successful cut a small victory. The figure, emerging from the maple, told a story, not of grand gestures or elaborate designs, but of simple truths discovered in silence. Ruth noticed how Anthony would sometimes pause in his work to watch Samuel playing in the yard through the workshop window. The boy had an uncanny ability to sense when he was being observed, often turning to meet Anthony's gaze with a knowing smile. What passed between them in those moments transcended the need for spoken words. As the carving neared completion, Eli shared with Ruth his observations of Anthony's journey. The elder spoke of how working with wood could reveal truths about oneself that no amount of talking could uncover. Had Anthony found in this simple task what he had been seeking when he first arrived in their community? The finished piece was not perfect in the conventional sense, but it carried something more valuable than technical precision. In its smooth curves and carefully considered details lay hours of thoughtful intention, each mark a testament to lessons learned in silence. What would Samuel see in this offering? How would he read the story Anthony had carved into the maple's heart? Miriam found herself holding her breath when Anthony finally presented the carving to Samuel. The boy's hands moved over the wood with the same careful attention he gave to everything that interested him deeply. His fingers traced each line and curve, reading the language Anthony had written in wood. What messages passed between them in that moment of shared understanding? The carving itself was deceptively simple. A small figure standing in quiet contemplation, its posture suggesting both strength and gentleness. Those who looked closely might notice how the grain of the wood seemed to flow through the figure like silent music, creating patterns that changed with the light. Had Anthony somehow captured in wood the essence of what he had learned from Samuel about the power of silence? The gift marked a turning point, though none who witnessed it could have explained exactly why. Perhaps it was the way Samuel clutched the carving to his chest, or how Anthony's eyes shone with unexpected emotion. Maybe it was the quiet nod of approval from Eli, or the way Miriam's hand found her father's shoulder in a gesture of shared understanding. What had begun as a simple project had become something more, a testament to the transformative power of working with hands and heart in equal measure. Through the act of creating, Anthony had discovered what Samuel had known all along, that the deepest connections often require no words at all. The Sunday morning air carried the gentle rhythm of hoofbeats as buggies converged on the Zook farmhouse, where this week's church service would be held. Anthony Hopkins stood quietly beside Ruth Becker, watching the gathering of Amish families dressed in their traditional Sunday best. The simplicity of their attire somehow made the moment more profound, as if the absence of ornament allowed the essence of community to shine through more clearly. What would it feel like, Anthony wondered, to be part of something so anciently rooted yet vibrantly alive? The question lingered as he followed Ruth's lead, entering the transformed barn where wooden benches had been arranged in neat rows. Samuel appeared at his side, a silent presence that had become increasingly comforting over the past days. The boy's small hand found Anthony's, and together they took their places among the congregation. The service began without announcement or fanfare, yet everyone seemed to know exactly when to rise. The first notes of the hymn emerged not from instruments but from human voices, starting as a single thread of sound before others joined in perfect harmony. The German words were foreign to Anthony's ears, but the melody spoke a language that transcended verbal understanding. He noticed how Eli's deep bass provided a foundation, while Miriam's clear soprano soared above, weaving through the collective voice of the community. Samuel's hand tightened in his as the music swelled. Though the boy couldn't speak, Anthony felt him participating in his own way, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the hymn. Across the aisle, Caleb's strong voice carried the melody, and Anthony caught a glimpse of the young leader's usually stern face softened by the act of worship. How many generations had sung these same songs in this same way? The harmonies filled the barn with a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Anthony found himself holding his breath, afraid to disturb the delicate web of voices. Ruth's presence beside him was steady and knowing, as if she understood exactly what he was experiencing. The Englishwoman had walked this bridge between worlds before him, and her quiet confidence helped anchor him in the moment. As one hymn flowed into another, Anthony began to understand something fundamental about this community. Their strength lay not in individual virtuosity but in the way each voice supported the others, creating something far greater than the sum of its parts. Even those who might not have the finest voices found their place in the harmony, accepted and essential to the whole. Miriam caught his eye briefly during a pause between songs, offering a small smile that spoke of acceptance. How far they had come from her initial wariness of his presence in their community. The music had a way of dissolving barriers, creating connections that words might have struggled to forge. Even Caleb, who had regarded Anthony with such skepticism, at first now nodded in acknowledgement when their gazes met. The singing continued, each hymn building upon the last like stones in an invisible cathedral of sound. Anthony observed how the younger children learned by listening and joining in when they could, absorbing their heritage through participation rather than instruction. What lessons lay embedded in this organic transmission of culture? How did this musical tradition shape the very fabric of their community? Samuel's free hand moved occasionally in subtle gestures, and Anthony realized the boy was conducting his own silent symphony, feeling the music in ways perhaps more profound than those who could sing aloud. The child's connection to the hymns revealed yet another layer of communication beyond words, challenging Anthony's assumptions about what it meant to participate fully in community worship. As the final notes of the last hymn faded into the rafters, a profound silence settled over the gathering. This silence felt different from any Anthony had experienced before, not empty but full, resonating with the echoes of shared devotion. He understood now why Ruth had insisted he attend this service, for in these moments of collective song and silence he glimpsed the heart of what bound these people together. The congregation began to move, preparing for the sermon that would follow, but Anthony remained still for a moment longer, holding on to the lingering vibrations of the music. How would this experience change him? What would he carry forward from this moment of profound connection through song? The questions settled into his consciousness like seeds waiting to sprout, promising future understanding that would unfold in its own time. The evening after the community gathering brought an unexpected shift in the dynamics between Miriam Zook and Sir Anthony Hopkins. As the sun cast long shadows across the farmland, Miriam found herself watching the distinguished actor helping Samuel feed the chickens, their silent communication speaking volumes about the bond they had formed. What had started as cautious observation transformed into something more profound when Miriam noticed how Anthony's presence had gradually changed her son. Samuel, though still silent, carried himself differently now. with a quiet confidence that seemed to emerge from his friendship with the English visitor. Could it be that her initial reservations had prevented her from seeing the blessing that Anthony's presence truly represented? Ruth Becker, who had been watching this transformation unfold over the past few days, approached Miriam as she stood by the kitchen window. The two women shared a knowing look, their understanding of Samuel's growth creating an unspoken connection. Ruth had witnessed how Anthony's patient acceptance of Samuel's silence had created a space where the boy felt truly seen, not merely observed. The watershed moment came during the evening meal preparation. Anthony had taken to helping in the kitchen, his famous hands now learning the humble art of peeling potatoes alongside Miriam. His quiet determination to learn their ways, to understand rather than judge, gradually softened the barriers Miriam had built. The simple act of working together, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional questions about Amish cooking techniques, created a bridge between their worlds. Eli Zook observed this subtle shift with quiet satisfaction. His daughter's journey from skepticism to acceptance mirrored the larger story of their community's relationship with Anthony. How many times had he seen this pattern repeat itself? The initial wariness, the gradual thawing, and finally, the recognition of shared humanity beneath the surface differences. Caleb, who had harbored his own doubts about the English visitor, found himself reconsidering his position as he watched Miriam's transformation. The young leader had noticed how Anthony's presence had sparked subtle but meaningful changes in their community. The way he approached their traditions with genuine curiosity, rather than touristic fascination, had earned him respect among even the most conservative members. The evening took an unexpected turn when Samuel brought out his grandfather's old book of pressed flowers. As the boy carefully showed Anthony each page, Miriam saw something she hadn't witnessed since before her husband's passing. Her son's eyes sparkled with joy. The simple interaction between them carried no pretense, no agenda, just pure connection. Ruth noticed tears forming in Miriam's eyes and gently touched her arm. What words could capture the complexity of a mother's heart watching her child bloom? The Englishwoman understood that this moment represented more than just acceptance. It was an acknowledgement of grace working in unexpected ways. Anthony's influence extended beyond his relationship with Samuel. His presence had somehow created a space where different worlds could meet without collision. The way he carried himself, humble yet dignified, curious yet respectful, had gradually reshaped the community's perception of the English world he represented. Eli's wisdom in inviting Anthony into their midst became increasingly apparent. The elder had seen beyond the surface differences to recognize a soul seeking authentic connection. His daughter's journey from resistance to acceptance validated his intuition about the English visitor's potential impact on their community. As the evening drew to a close, Miriam found herself standing beside Anthony as they watched Samuel help his grandfather with the evening chores. The silence between them felt different now, comfortable, almost familial. What had changed? Perhaps it wasn't Anthony who had changed at all, but rather her ability to see him clearly, without the distortion of preconception and fear. The transformation in Miriam's heart rippled through the community. Her acceptance of Anthony carried weight among those who still held reservations about his presence. If the widow Zook, known for her careful judgment and protective nature, could open her heart to this English visitor, what did that say about their collective capacity for growth and understanding? This subtle shift in Miriam's perspective marked a turning point in Anthony's stay among the Amish. How would this newfound acceptance shape the remaining days of his visit? What other transformations lay ahead as barriers continued to fall and understanding deepened? The gentle flicker of candlelight illuminated Ruth's weathered journal as she sat across from Anthony in her modest English home at the edge of the Amish community. The pages held years of observations, reflections, and poetry inspired by her unique position between two worlds. What insights could poetry offer about the profound silence that had transformed both their lives? Ruth's fingers traced the handwritten verses, each one capturing moments of revelation she'd witnessed among the plain folk. Her voice carried the weight of experience as she shared a poem about Samuel's silent wisdom, drawing parallels between the boy's peaceful presence and the natural rhythms of their shared landscape. The words resonated with Anthony's own journey. touching upon the universal language that transcended speech. Through her carefully chosen phrases, Ruth revealed how she had discovered healing in the spaces between words, in the patient pause of an Amish buggy waiting at a crossing, in the pre-dawn stillness of a community rising to begin their day. Her poetry spoke of transformation, not as a sudden change but as a gradual awakening, much like Anthony's own experience among the Zook family. The conversation deepened as Ruth shared her observations of how silence had shaped Samuel's interactions with the world around him. Her verses painted pictures of the boy's unique way of seeing, his ability to communicate volumes through the smallest gestures. Could it be that Samuel's silence had made him more attuned to the subtle languages that most people overlooked in their rush to fill the air with words? Anthony found himself drawn to a particular piece that captured the moment he first arrived at Eli's farm, seeing it through Ruth's perspective as she had watched from afar. Her words crystallized the tension between his former life and the simplicity he had discovered here, the initial resistance melting into acceptance. The poetry served as a mirror, reflecting back the profound changes that had occurred within him during his stay. Ruth's writings also explored the delicate dance between the English and Amish worlds, the mutual respect and occasional misunderstandings that colored their interactions. Her position as a bridge between cultures had given her unique insights into both communities, and her poetry reflected the beauty and complexity of this relationship. What could others learn from this careful balance of tradition and change? The evening unfolded through shared verses and quiet contemplation, with Ruth occasionally pausing to explain the context behind certain poems. She had captured Miriam's journey from grief to renewal, Caleb's growth as a leader, and Eli's steadfast wisdom. Each piece added another layer to the tapestry of understanding that Anthony had been weaving during his time among the plain folk. As Ruth turned to her most recent writings, she revealed poems that spoke directly to Anthony's presence in their community. Her verses captured the subtle shifts in dynamics, the way his arrival had created ripples of change while simultaneously drawing strength from the unchanging core of Amish life. How had he managed to become such an integral part of their world in such a short time? The poetry session evolved into a deeper discussion about the nature of community and belonging. Ruth's words had captured the essence of what Anthony had been experiencing, the gradual dissolution of barriers between himself and the Amish way of life. Through her artistic lens, the seemingly simple daily routines transformed into profound expressions of faith and connection. Ruth's final poem of the evening touched upon the concept of temporary presence creating permanent change. The verses spoke to Anthony's impending departure, yet suggested that his impact on the community, and their impact on him, would resonate far beyond his physical stay. What lasting echoes would his brief sojourn leave in the lives of those he had come to know? The sharing of poetry had opened new channels of understanding, allowing Anthony to see his experience reflected through another's perspective. Ruth's careful observations and artistic expression had given voice to the unspoken transformations that had occurred during his time with the Zook family. As the evening drew to a close, both Anthony and Ruth sat in companionable silence, letting the power of the words settle around them like gentle snow, each flake a crystallized moment of truth and discovery. As dawn broke over the Lancaster countryside, the nearly finished barn stood as a testament to the community's unwavering dedication. The structure, which had begun as mere timber and plans, now reached proudly toward the morning sky, its fresh wooden beams gleaming in the early light. Sir Anthony Hopkins stood alongside Eli Zook, both men's faces bearing expressions of quiet satisfaction as they surveyed the week's accomplishments. The final day of construction brought an energy unlike any other, with dozens of community members gathering to complete the remaining tasks. Caleb, who had initially regarded Anthony with skepticism, now worked seamlessly beside him, directing the placement of the last roof shingles. Their earlier tension had dissolved into a mutual respect, forged through shared labor and unspoken understanding. Throughout the morning, Samuel Zook darted between the workers, his small hands offering tools and water with an efficiency that belied his young age. Though unable to speak, his eyes sparkled with pride as he watched the barn take its final shape. Anthony noticed how the boy's gestures had become more confident over the week, his silence no longer a barrier, but a unique form of communication that the entire community had learned to read. Miriam Zook coordinated the women's efforts, organizing the feast that would celebrate the barn raising's completion. The kitchen buzzed with activity as traditional dishes were prepared, the aroma of fresh bread and pie wafting across the property. Ruth Becker moved between both worlds, helping with the cooking while occasionally stepping outside to document the final stages of construction in her ever-present notebook. As the afternoon progressed, the last nail was driven home. Caleb descended from the roof, exchanging a meaningful nod with Eli. The elder's weathered face creased with joy as he gathered everyone around. Without fanfare or ceremony, the community naturally formed a circle around the barn's entrance. The moment carried its own weight, needing no formal announcement. Ruth stood near Anthony, her presence a familiar comfort after the week's shared experiences. She had witnessed his transformation from an outsider seeking silence to someone who had found his place within the community's rhythms. The poetry she had shared the previous day seemed to hover in the air between them, unspoken but understood. The feast began with Eli's simple prayer of thanksgiving, followed by the comfortable chaos of community dining. Children weaved between, adults' plates were passed, and laughter mixed with conversation in a symphony of fellowship. Anthony found himself seated between Samuel and Ruth, with Caleb and Miriam across the table. The arrangement felt natural, as if these relationships had existed far longer than a mere week. Throughout the meal, Anthony observed the subtle interactions that defined this community. The way Miriam's hand would rest briefly on Samuel's shoulder as she passed, Caleb's respectful attention when Eli spoke, and the children's uninhibited joy as they played around the adults. These moments, seemingly ordinary, carried profound meaning in their simplicity. As evening approached, the celebration continued with traditional songs. Though Anthony didn't know the words, he found himself swaying to the harmonies. Samuel sat beside him, their shoulders touching, both content in their shared silence. Across the gathering, Ruth caught Anthony's eye and smiled, understanding the significance of this moment in his journey. The barn stood as more than just a structure. It represented the tangible outcome of community, silence, and shared purpose. For Anthony, it marked the physical manifestation of his internal transformation. The lessons learned during its construction, about silence, community, and genuine connection, would remain long after he returned to his life beyond Lancaster County. Eli approached Anthony as the sky turned purple with dusk. The elder's eyes held wisdom and warmth as he gestured toward the barn, inviting Anthony to take one final walk around the structure they had all built together. As they walked, their footsteps fell into a natural rhythm, no words necessary between them. The barn's solid presence seemed to echo the strength of the bonds formed during its raising, bonds that transcended cultural differences and individual limitations. What began as a quest for silence had evolved into something far more profound. The barn would stand as a reminder of how a diverse group of individuals, each carrying their own forms of silence, could come together to create something greater than themselves. As the stars began to appear above the newly completed structure, the question lingered. How would these lessons reshape Anthony's understanding of silence, community, and himself in the days to come? As dusk settled over the completed barn, Sir Anthony Hopkins found himself seated on Eli Zook's front porch, the wooden planks still warm from the day's sun. The celebration had naturally wound down, leaving behind a contemplative silence that spoke volumes about the week's transformative journey. Young Samuel sat quietly beside him, their shoulders barely touching, sharing the comfortable silence that had become their unique language. Through the kitchen window, the soft glow of oil lamps illuminated Miriam and Ruth as they worked together, preparing the evening meal. Their movements carried an easy familiarity that would have seemed impossible just days ago. What had changed? Perhaps it wasn't the people who had changed, but rather the lens through which they viewed one another. Eli emerged from the barn, his weathered hands bearing the honest dirt of a day's labor. He joined them on the porch, settling into his familiar rocking chair with a gentle creak. "Sometimes," he began, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom, "the greatest lessons come, not from what we build, but from who we become while building it. The words resonated with Anthony, who had witnessed the intricate dance of community and faith throughout the week. He recalled his initial skepticism, the way he had arrived with a notebook full of questions but found answers in the spaces between words. How many times had he reached for that notebook, only to realize that the real story wasn't something that could be captured in ink? Caleb approached the porch, his usual authoritative stride softened by the evening's peaceful atmosphere. The young leader had shed his earlier guardedness, replaced by a genuine respect that showed in the way he acknowledged Anthony with a slight nod. The English world moves so fast, Caleb observed, leaning against the porch railing. Yet here you are, learning to be still. Samuel's hand found Anthony's sleeve, tugging gently. The boy's eyes carried a question, and Anthony understood without words. They had developed their own silent vocabulary, built on shared moments and mutual understanding. What would happen to this connection once Anthony returned to his world of constant noise and motion? Ruth appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's nearly ready," she announced, but lingered a moment longer. Her presence had been instrumental, bridging two worlds with grace and understanding. She caught Anthony's eye, and a knowing look passed between them. They both understood that some transformations couldn't be explained, only experienced. Inside, Miriam was setting the table, the simple act carrying a rhythm that spoke of generations of tradition. The clink of plates and the soft shuffle of feet created a melody that Anthony had grown to appreciate. How different it was from the orchestrated symphonies he was accustomed to, yet no less beautiful in its authenticity. As they gathered around the table, the conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences. Stories emerged organically, some shared for the first time, others familiar but gaining new meaning in the retelling. Anthony found himself speaking less and listening more, understanding that wisdom often resided in the quiet spaces between words. The evening light faded gradually, casting long shadows through the windows. Samuel's head nodded occasionally, fighting sleep but determined to remain present for these final hours. The boy's resilience and silent strength had taught Anthony more about communication than any script or dialogue ever had. Eli shared a parable about a traveler who discovered that the journey itself was the destination. The story seemed particularly poignant now, as Anthony contemplated his imminent departure. How does one carry forward the lessons learned in stillness? What happens when the quiet wisdom of this place meets the clamoring demands of the outside world? As the evening drew to a close, the conversation turned to tomorrow's farewell, though no one spoke of it directly. Instead, they discussed the changing seasons, the work yet to be done, the continuous cycle of community life that would continue long after Anthony's departure. There was comfort in this continuity, a reminder that some things remain constant, even as others change. The oil lamps cast a warm glow over the gathered faces, each one now familiar, each holding a piece of the story Anthony had come to discover. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this moment of shared silence and understanding, everything was exactly as it should be. What lasting imprint would this evening leave on each of them? How would these quiet revelations continue to unfold long after the goodbyes were spoken? The answers lay not in words, but in the gentle certainty that some connections, once forged in silence and understanding, transcend the boundaries of time and culture. Morning arrived with the same gentle persistence that had marked Anthony's entire week among the Amish. The familiar sounds of clip-clopping hooves and distant roosters filtered through his window at Eli's home. But today these sounds carried a different weight. How many mornings had he awakened to these same rural symphonies, not realizing how quickly they would become dear to him? Anthony packed his belongings with methodical care, noting how little he had actually needed during his stay. His expensive watch, which had remained in his suitcase all week, seemed oddly garish now. What had once felt essential now appeared superficial against the backdrop of simple living he had experienced. His fingers traced the small wooden horse Samuel had carved for him, a parting gift presented silently the night before, and carefully wrapped it in his softest shirt. Downstairs, Miriam moved quietly through her morning routine, preparing a farewell breakfast that filled the house with the aroma of fresh bread and eggs. She worked with practiced efficiency, yet Anthony noticed her movements were slower today, more deliberate, as if she too were trying to preserve these final moments. When their eyes met, her slight nod carried understanding that transcended their initial wariness of each other. Eli joined them at the table, his weathered hands folded in prayer with the same reverence Anthony had witnessed that first morning. How different it felt now. No longer foreign or uncomfortable, but comforting in its familiarity. The meal passed with sparse conversation, yet the silence spoke volumes of the bonds formed over shared work and quiet understanding. Samuel appeared at Anthony's elbow as he finished his meal, those expressive eyes saying more than words ever could. The boy had taught Anthony more about communication in a week than he had learned in decades of public speaking. Without ceremony, Samuel took Anthony's hand and led him outside, where the morning dew still clung to the grass. Ruth's arrival in her modest car seemed almost intrusive in the peaceful scene, though her presence had become as natural as any other part of this community. She stood back, allowing space for the necessary goodbyes, her understanding of both worlds making her the perfect bridge for this transition. Caleb appeared with several other community members, their presence unexpected but welcome. The young leader's firm handshake conveyed respect that had been hard-won through shared labor and growing understanding. What had begun as suspicion had transformed into something approaching friendship, though neither man felt the need to name it as such. The gathering grew organically as word spread of Anthony's departure. Community members appeared with small gifts, jars of preserved fruits, fresh bread, hand-carved items, each offering accompanied by few words but genuine warmth. How had these people, so different from his usual associates, come to feel like family in such a short time? Eli stepped forward last, his presence commanding the same quiet authority it had since Anthony's arrival. The elder's words were few, but chosen with care. "Remember, friend, that thee carries a piece of us with thee now." The simple statement encompassed everything that had transpired during Anthony's stay. The lessons learned, the perspectives shifted, the friendships formed. As Anthony settled into Ruth's car, Samuel suddenly broke from his mother's side, running, to press something into Anthony's hand, a small paper with carefully drawn figures representing their unusual friendship. The boy's face showed no tears, only quiet determination and understanding beyond his years. The car pulled away slowly, and Anthony watched in the side mirror as the gathering dispersed with typical Amish efficiency. No lingering or dramatic gestures, just a return to the rhythm of their days. Yet he knew, as the distance grew between them, that something profound had shifted within him. How could he return to his former life unchanged by what he had experienced here? Ruth drove in companionable silence, seeming to understand Anthony's need to process these final moments. The familiar landscape rolled past, but Anthony's perspective had altered. Where once he had seen simplicity bordering on deprivation, he now recognized richness of a different kind. What would he carry forward from this week among the plain people? How would these lessons reshape his understanding of success, community, and purpose? The morning sun cast long shadows across the Zook farmyard as Anthony knelt before Samuel, their eyes meeting in a moment of wordless understanding. How could silence speak so loudly? The bond between the acclaimed actor and the mute Amish boy had grown into something neither could have anticipated when Anthony first arrived at the settlement. Samuel's small hands moved with deliberate grace, forming the signs he and Anthony had developed during their time together. Each gesture carried weight beyond mere communication. They were sharing pieces of their hearts. Anthony responded with the careful movements they had practiced, his weathered hands mirroring the boy's motions with surprising fluidity. Ruth Becker watched from a respectful distance, her presence a gentle reminder of the bridge between worlds that had made this connection possible. She had witnessed their unique relationship blossom over the past week, understanding that sometimes the most profound connections require no words at all. The Englishwoman felt her eyes grow misty as Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew, a small hand-carved wooden horse presenting it to Anthony with solemn ceremony. Anthony accepted the gift with equal gravity, turning the smooth figure over in his hands. The craftsmanship spoke of hours of patient work, each detail lovingly shaped by Samuel's young hands under Eli's guidance. The wooden horse represented more than just a parting gift. It embodied the pure, uncomplicated friendship that had developed between them. Miriam stood in the doorway of the farmhouse, her heart both heavy and full as she observed her son's farewell. The transformation in Samuel over the past week had been remarkable. The usually withdrawn boy had opened up in Anthony's presence, finding a kindred spirit who understood the power of silent communication. Would Samuel find another such friend who could speak so clearly without words? Anthony reached into his own coat pocket and produced a small leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with sketches they had made together during their quiet afternoon sessions. Samuel's eyes widened as Anthony placed it in his hands, understanding the significance of this exchange. The notebook contained their shared language, simple drawings that had allowed them to build bridges between their different worlds. Eli Zook approached quietly, his presence adding weight to the moment. He had watched this unlikely friendship develop, seeing how it had enriched both his grandson and their English visitor. The elder's wise eyes held a depth of understanding as he observed their farewell ritual. What lessons could the world learn from such pure connection? Caleb, who had initially viewed Anthony's presence with skepticism, now stood respectfully aside. The young Amish leader had come to appreciate how this outsider had touched their community, particularly in his gentle interactions with Samuel. The transformation in his own perspective served as a testament to the power of opening one's heart to unexpected friendships. Samuel's hands moved again, forming one final message, a simple gesture they had created to mean, "Friend forever." Anthony repeated the motion, his typically composed features softening with emotion. The boy then stepped forward and, breaking with usual Amish reserve, gave Anthony a quick, fierce hug. The embrace lasted only moments, but its impact would endure far beyond this morning. As Samuel stepped back, his eyes shining with unshed tears, Anthony rose slowly to his feet. The wooden horse found its way into his pocket, where it would remain as a tangible reminder of this extraordinary week and the young boy who had taught him so much about the power of silent understanding. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh hay and approaching autumn, a sensory reminder that time moves forward regardless of human wishes. How many more moments would these two unlikely friends share in their memories? What invisible threads would continue to connect them across the distance of their different worlds? Ruth stepped forward gently, knowing it was time to guide Anthony toward his departure. The actor's car waited at the end of the lane, ready to carry him back to his world of cameras and scripts. Yet something profound had shifted within him during his stay, a lesson in authentic connection that no acting class could have provided. As dawn painted the Lancaster County sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold, Sir Anthony Hopkins stood at the threshold of Eli Zook's farmhouse, his heart heavier than the modest suitcase in his hand. How could 1 week in this simple place have altered him so profoundly? The weight of impending departure pressed against his chest as he watched the morning routine of the Amish community unfold before him. Ruth Becker appeared on the gravel path, her familiar presence a bridge between the worlds he now straddled. She had offered to drive him to the train station, understanding without words the delicate nature of this transition. Their shared experiences over the past week had forged an unspoken bond, built on mutual respect for the transformative power of silence. Eli Zook emerged from the barn, his weathered hands brushing hay from his traditional black vest. The elder's eyes held the wisdom of generations, and Anthony found himself wondering how many others had stood where he now stood, forever changed by their encounter with this remarkable man. Their farewell was characteristically understated, yet profound in its simplicity. "The silence will go with thee," Eli said, his Pennsylvania Dutch accent carrying the weight of truth. "It has become part of who thou art now." Miriam appeared in the doorway, Samuel's small hand clasped in hers. The boy's expression carried echoes of their shared moments, the wooden horse still tucked safely in Anthony's bag, a tangible reminder of their wordless connection. How strange that his most meaningful relationship of the week had been with a child who never spoke a word. Caleb approached from the fields, his initial skepticism long since transformed into genuine respect. The young leader's evolution mirrored Anthony's own journey from outsider to accepted friend. Their handshake spoke volumes about the bridges built between their seemingly disparate worlds. As Ruth's car pulled away from the farm, Anthony watched through the rear window as the figures grew smaller, their raised hands frozen in farewell. The clip-clop of horse hooves and the gentle sway of laundry in the morning breeze created a tableau he knew would forever remain etched in his memory. The journey to the train station passed in contemplative silence, both Anthony and Ruth understanding that words would only diminish the significance of the moment. What could be said about a week that had fundamentally shifted one's understanding of communication, community, and connection? At the station, Ruth turned to Anthony with knowing eyes. "You'll carry this with you, won't you? The power of presence?" Anthony nodded, his theatrical voice subdued by emotion. "I came seeking silence as a tool for my craft. I leave understanding it as a way of being." The train's arrival brought with it the harsh intrusion of the modern world, the screech of brakes, the hiss of hydraulics, the chatter of passengers. Yet Anthony found these sounds no longer grated against his consciousness as they once had. Instead, they existed alongside the silence he now carried within. As he settled into his seat, Anthony's hand brushed against Samuel's wooden horse in his pocket. The smooth texture of the hand-carved toy triggered a cascade of memories. Morning, prayers in Eli's kitchen, the collective purpose of the barn raising, the silent wisdom in Samuel's eyes. The train began to move, Lancaster County sliding past his window in a blur of green fields and white farmhouses. Anthony closed his eyes, allowing the gentle rhythm of the rails to carry him back toward his life in London. But he knew with absolute certainty that he was not the same man who had arrived a week ago. What would his colleagues make of this transformed version of himself? How would this newfound understanding of silence translate to the bright lights and constant noise of the theater? These questions no longer carried the weight of anxiety they might have before. Instead, they felt like the beginning of a new Chapter 1 written in the language of presence rather than performance. The Pennsylvania countryside gave way to more urban landscapes, yet Anthony maintained his connection to the silence he had discovered. It was no longer something to be sought or achieved, but rather a constant companion, as reliable as the wooden horse in his pocket, or the memories of Samuel's smile. In the distance, the city skyline began to materialize, its modern towers reaching toward the clouds. Anthony Hopkins, celebrated actor and newly transformed student of silence, allowed himself a small smile. He had come to Lancaster County seeking a tool for his craft, but had discovered instead a fundamental truth about human connection. The journey home was not just a physical transition, but the beginning of a new way of being in the world. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.